It takes far longer to build something than it does to tear it down. This may seem like a trivial observation. Another trivial observation: you don't truly appreciate something until you've lost it. I believe these principles working together have gotten us where we are right now. Most of America doesn't fully grasp just how much damage has already been done to our most important institutions and how far-reaching the consequences will be for decades to come. My name is DJ Morrow. I'm a fine art balloon artist. In this video, we're going to take a look at a balloon sculpture that I made expressing my deep feelings of loss at the undermining and the dismantling of the country's judicial, research, and healthcare systems. I knew I wanted a building to tell this story, and I decided on a barn for a couple of different reasons. I needed something with an easily recognizable form and color whose iconography would be recognizable through the deformation and the noise of the broken wooden panels. Having a solid saturated color also helped the rift violently tearing through the sculpture to stand out as a main focal point. The notion of our chickens coming home to roost was made literal with the addition of an angry-looking chicken set at the peak of all this chaos. Communicating a message of catastrophic loss through architectural imagery was a new exercise for me. I usually rely on the pose and expression of characters, so having the main character be a building was really outside my comfort zone. It took me 4 days of dedicated work to bring this concept to life, and size-wise, this is one of the largest sculptures I've ever made, coming in at over 10 feet tall. The design and construction of this ended up being fairly simple. It's 4 walls and a roof. The walls were made from a brick weave, which is a 2-layer weave where every layer is offset by half, so each layer connects with every other layer going up. The ceiling was a flat weave, which is that same 2-layer setup, except there's no offset. Where things get interesting is the eponymous rift. I didn't want to split the structure clean down the middle. I wanted a natural, splintered look. That's easy enough to do on one side. The trick was reversing what you've done correctly on the other side so that when you put the two pieces together, you get a whole and unbroken wall. I started the first day on the back wall because I wasn't planning to put any windows in it, so planning out the break line pattern was going to be way simpler. The other challenge that I had with the brick weave was making sure that my segments read as wooden panels rather than bricks. My solution was to make the panels as long as I could, to the point where they stop reading as bricks and start reading as wooden panels. With the help of some temporary pencil markings on the table, I was able to get the segments relatively uniform without having to compare one against the other every single time. I've been using Calisand balloons since early 2024. They're my go-to when I need some really subtle color variations, and they were generous enough to sponsor the balloons for this build. Knowing what size and number of segments I needed for each row, it was just a matter of cranking them all out and stringing them together. Large structures made from repetitive building blocks make for long and boring days, but they make for great time lapses, which is also good because I need some time to circle back and build on what I was talking about in the introduction in terms of damage sustained by our institutions. So much of the ongoing destruction is largely invisible. If the government started ripping out all the roads, we'd all notice immediately, but bureaucratic changes to organizations that most people are only vaguely aware of doesn't immediately demand the appropriate outrage. So in a small segment during each day of the build, I'd like to dig a little deeper into the seismic shifts that are rocking this country's institutions and ask what the long-term effects that we're going to have to deal with are. Let's start by taking a look at the role of research institutions in America. Scientific research has long been a key driver in the prosperity and high standard of living found here in America. Ever since the end of World War II, the prioritizing of research funding has shown returns of between 140 and 210%. That means for every dollar spent on research, we've gotten back between $1.40 and $2.10 in economic output. The Federal Reserve estimates that government-funded research and development accounted for 1/5 of the growth in productivity since World War II. But those are abstract numbers. What did the output actually do for the average American? I mean, seemingly everything. We eradicated polio, pioneered chemotherapy. We put people on the moon. Cheaper produce, modern air travel, GPS, the internet. Everything around you is a result of making scientific research a top priority in this country. We've led the world in R&D funding for over 75 years, but that position is currently under major threat by the Trump administration's hostility towards science and education. Large-scale funding cuts to the National Science Foundation, National Institute for Health, and Environmental Protection Agency, among others, have devastated the scientific community and done serious damage to the long-term effectiveness of our research institutions. The 2026 request for federal funding of R&D has been axed by as much as 35%, and while it remains to be seen how much Congress will end up apportioning, 2025 has given us plenty of proof that Trump has zero qualms about simply not distributing congressionally approved funds. United States Constitution be damned. But DJ, I hear nobody say, research funding from businesses is at an all-time high. Why can't the private sector pick up the slack here? And the problem here comes with what kind of research the private sector tends to fund versus what the federal government is capable of supporting. We can see in this graph here that federal funds have an outsized impact in basic research, with businesses contributing more further down the pipeline in applied research and experimental development. Let me explain the significance of this. Research is often split into two main categories. Basic research is meant to advance our understanding of the fundamental principles and forces at work in the world around us. It's curiosity-driven, studying nature, physics, biology. It's meant to build up our foundation of knowledge. Basic research tells us the structure of DNA, the social dynamics of bees, and the development of the human brain. Applied research, on the other hand, is meant to solve problems or come up with novel inventions using that base of knowledge that we've already developed. It's outcome-oriented, giving us genetic engineering from our knowledge of molecular biology, quantum computing from our knowledge of quantum mechanics, and satellites from our knowledge of orbital mechanics. The keen-eyed among you may have already spotted the problem here. Basic research lacks financial incentive in a short-term, profit-driven market economy. The benefit and utility of basic research is unpredictable and often only discovered decades afterwards. There's no guarantee who exactly is going to end up benefiting, and its long-term scope makes it a poor investment vehicle for a market obsessed with next quarter's profits. In a Senate Commerce hearing in 2016, the corporate vice president for Microsoft Research wrote that, although U.S. industry funds and performs roughly 2/3 of the nation's R&D, these activities focus primarily on development rather than basic research. Most companies lack large central research operations and cannot afford to fund basic research due to the risk of being penalized by corporate shareholders who do not prioritize such long-term investments. With these funding cuts, the government's role as the foundational support for scientific progress comes into question. At the same time, we're at risk of losing our most valuable scientific resource, the men and women who dedicate their lives to furthering our understanding of the world. For those who do get lucky and have their grants reinstated, the disruption will continue far into the future. From a series of interviews in the New York Times, we get a glimpse into the chaos and uncertainty that these researchers now have to deal with. Mason Peck, a professor of astronautical engineering at Cornell University, wrote, "If we are fortunate enough to restart, we will have lost a lot of time and money. It's like putting on a tourniquet and staunching the blood flow. Too much time of that kind of reduction in resources means you lose the limb." Following being let go from her job upgrading tsunami warning systems, Karina Allen told the New York Times, "NOAA's tsunami program was already bare bones and needed more staff and funding. It's a small team, and losing even a few people like me with niche expertise that's difficult to replace means things will fall through the cracks." It's not just ongoing research and development that's at stake here. The next generation of students meant to take up the mantle are being stranded with fewer places left to gain research experience. Shruti Mahalingaya, a Harvard researcher studying the connection between air pollution and women's infertility, said, "The grant cancellations forced layoffs. It not only limits the research, but the pipeline. Inspiring the next generation of physician scientists, that is going to take a hit. Kevin Gurney, an atmospheric scientist working to combat heat deaths in urban settings, had this to say in regards to losing his staff. It's devastating in a variety of ways that we won't feel right now. It's a loss of the pipeline of people being trained to do science that matters. Shutting that off isn't something we can recover from quickly. This feels like a total paradigm shift in the government's role supporting science. Science does not function when priorities change every 2 years. It takes too long, requires too much long-term thinking, supporting scientists, the developing of intellectual ideas. It is a long-term endeavor of building one brick at a time to advance our knowledge. Where does this all leave us? If the trend of anti-intellectualism is magically reversed tomorrow, if all the funding our researchers need gets reinstated, we'll still have lost hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of these disruptions. We'd be left having to repair the shattered trust that once allowed the investment of long-term studies and a government-university collaboration meant to serve the national interest and public good. But this pie-in-the-sky reversal seems a long, long way out, and things look to be getting a lot worse before they get better. My goal with day 2 was to complete both of the side walls, which wouldn't take very long because they were much shorter than the front and the back walls, and then I would work on the roof segments with whatever time I had left. This involved stacking layer on layer of the brick segments just like day 1 until I get to the windows, at which point I make sure to leave a gap for that and continue the pattern upwards. As the time lapse for that plays out, I'd like to examine another area of institutional failure we're seeing here in the US. In the previous section, I mentioned the NIH as one of the main groups losing funding. The NIH is the arm of the Department of Health and Human Services responsible for biomedical and public health research. These cuts should be understood in the context of a larger assault on the core functions of the HHS. The HHS and its various bodies such as the CDC and the FDA have inherited America's legacy of sweeping public health reforms that have seen massive improvements to the life expectancy and well-being for both Americans and the global population as a whole. In a 1948 book detailing public health reforms responsible for decreasing infant mortality, Professor Richard Meckel writes that somewhere between 15 and 20% of all American infants born in the second half of the 19th century died before they could celebrate their first birthdays. In sharp contrast, only 1% of all American infants born today die under the age of 1. One of the factors he attributes to this improvement was the controlling of milk-borne diseases. The yearly epidemics of infant summer diarrhea, good lord, would eventually come to an end, thanks in no small part to the widespread adoption of milk pasteurization, currently regulated under the FDA. Let's put a pin in that. Probably the most substantial contributing factor to improved public health over the last century has been the myriad of life-saving vaccines developed here in the United States, which turned horrors like polio into just a memory. From the book Polio, An American Story, David M. Oshinsky gives us a glimpse into the terror that this disease inflicted on the world in the mid-20th century. He writes, "Polio hit without warning. There was no way of telling who would get it and who would be spared. It killed some of its victims and marked others for life, leaving behind vivid reminders for all to see. Wheelchairs, crutches, leg braces, breathing devices, deformed limbs. At the height of its spread, polio was killing or paralyzing 500,000 people every year worldwide. In 1954, through the NIH's funding of research and coordination of the largest clinical trial ever conducted, we came up with a successful vaccine that the CDC then helped distribute. In less than a decade, recorded polio cases in America dropped from a peak of 57,000 to fewer than 200. By 1978, we were free of the disease and saw a near global eradication by the turn of the century. We didn't just stop at polio. From the 60s onward, the HHS would collaborate with researchers to develop vaccines for measles, hepatitis, and of course COVID-19, among many others. A journal article in The Lancet estimates that in the past 50 years, vaccines have prevented 154 million deaths, 95% of which would have occurred before the age of 5. The U.S.'s contribution to that effort is a legacy that we should proudly safeguard and carry forward far into the future. So here's where I tell you how that legacy is currently being endangered. While this video wasn't meant as an examination of those steering our institutional collapse, I do need to provide some context here when introducing RFK Jr. in order to lay out just how unqualified he is as the current head of the HHS. This is a man with no medical or public health training, whose only relevant experience has been as the chairman of Children's Health Defense, an anti-vax group responsible for a surge in vaccine hesitancy through the spreading of misinformation and fear-mongering. In the words of Senator Brian Schultz, for the first time ever, we will have a health secretary who has actively helped to cause outbreak instead of to contain them. We'll have someone in charge of medical research who has taken every opportunity to undermine science instead of promoting it. RFK Jr. and the Children's Health Defense's perpetuation of the vaccine autism myth, as well as their numerous lawsuits against the HHS, have all contributed to the alarming drop in vaccine participancy we've seen over the last decade. And that harm isn't limited to the US either. Quoting Senator Schultz again, in 2019, he flew to Samoa to discourage people from taking the measles vaccine. 6,000 people got the measles. 83 people died. 79 of them were kids. It is so chilling to contemplate the idea that someone as recognizable as a Kennedy would fly across an ocean to a small, developing country and basically tell everybody, be afraid of this life-saving medicine. Hey, those walls look pretty good. But you know what wasn't good? RFK Jr.'s appointment as Secretary of the HHS in 2025, the results of which have been as predictable as they are devastating. Thousands of dedicated public servants were let go. Every member of the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee was removed, with vaccine skeptics being put in their place. The CDC director, Susan Menares, was removed after refusing to go along with the agency's new direction, triggering a wave of resignations from top officials representing decades of public health experience lost. Drained of expertise and driven by a predetermined agenda, the government released reports criticizing vaccines containing citations to studies that never existed, seemingly hallucinated by the AI that they used to draft the reports. Measles began to spread throughout the country in 2025, and the outbreaks continued into 2026, fueled almost entirely by those choosing to forego vaccination. While RFK Jr. has seen mass calls for his resignation from groups such as Doctors for America, National Nurses United, and the American Public Health Association, his crusade against our established national health institutions is likely to continue unabated. The weighty cost of this turning away from established science won't just be paid for in the loss of countless specialized public servants, but ultimately in lives lost, as illnesses that were once thought of as problems of the past make their deadly return to the present. Oh, and unpasteurized milk is making a comeback, so we all have that yearly infant summer diarrhea to look forward to as well. I was pretty happy to get both sidewalls done, plus a full roof segment by the end of day 2. While these chrome balloons are delightfully shiny, they don't really fit with the old and broken down barn aesthetic. I later solved this problem by putting them outside in the sun for 10 minutes on each side, which oxidized it enough to give that aged tin roof look that you'll see later on in the video. I felt pretty good about the pace I was keeping going into day 3. I started work on the front wall, which was a little bit more complicated with the cutout of the windows and the door, but creating the rift was going to be easier because I already had a pattern from the back wall that I could refer to. Referring back to that pattern would eventually lure me into a false sense of security and cause me to make mistakes that I'd have to go back and fix, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Before that, I have one more area of institutional collapse that I'd like to highlight for this video. That being the compromising of the Supreme Court of the United States and our justice system as a whole in service of the fascist government that's currently playing for keeps. This not only compromises our system of government, but the foundation of our social contract, that laws will be interpreted predictably and impartially, and we in turn will do our best to follow them. The tripartite system of government, as designed by the Founding Fathers, requires each branch to exercise its checks and balances against the others in a deliberately balanced game of rock, paper, scissors. Over the last several years, the Supreme Court has worked hand in hand with this administrative branch to disrupt that balance, giving themselves and the presidency unprecedented power at the expense of the legislative branch. A favored vehicle for appropriating this power has been through use of what's known as the shadow docket. Also known as the emergency docket, this process is meant to grant summary judgments and temporary relief in cases where delay would risk serious irreparable harm, such as with rapidly approaching elections or death penalty cases. These judgments can be rendered without the usual extended briefings, argumentation, and expert opinion that usually occur. Likewise, the rulings are rarely accompanied by an in-depth explanation for their reasoning or even transparency in where each justice came down on the matter. They're deliberated in secret, issued tersely, and have, as of recently, been used as a scalpel to surgically hand wins to the Trump administration without creating binding precedent that might benefit any future Democrat administration. It can't really be overstated what a stark departure from the norm this practice has become. Since January of 2025, as of this recording at least, the Trump administration has filed 31 emergency applications, more than Bush, Obama, and Biden in all of their years combined. And the vast majority of those were accepted and decided in Trump's favor. These rulings have sanctioned racial profiling, removed rights from trans people, and undermined Congress's constitutionally designated power of the purse. None of these rulings are an appropriate use of the shadow docket, which has become a way for the Supreme Court to avoid accountability while enabling authoritarianism. Back with the balloons here, this is when I realized that I got too caught up copying the rift pattern from the back wall and forgot to put in the window holes. Luckily, it's pretty easy to fix mistakes with balloons. I don't know how we fix the mistakes our courts are making, some of which also include conventional rulings meant to support the Trump administration's anti-pluralist agenda. One such example is their overhaul of the means by which questions of separation of church and state have historically been decided, known as the Lemon Test. Created in 1971 during the trial of Lemon v. Kurtzman, this test sets the threshold for laws interacting with religion, requiring them to fulfill a legitimate secular purpose, not have the primary effect of either advancing or inhibiting religion, and not result in an excessive entanglement of government and religion. This test was in use for 50 years until it was officially abandoned in 2022 with the case of Kennedy v. Bremerton. Ruling in favor of a high school football coach being allowed to lead prayer mid-field after games, the courts dropped the three-pronged Lemon Test, adopting instead an approach emphasizing reference to historical practice and understandings. As a consequence, the values of religious pluralism and equality are being superseded all around the country by judges invoking America's long history of preferential treatment for Christians specifically, a history often defined by either bigoted exclusion or a mere uncritical consensus born of religious homogeny. State-mandated Ten Commandments displays are quickly giving way to legalized LGBT discrimination on religious grounds, as Christian nationalists race to take advantage of this favorable Supreme Court landscape. Taken together with Dobbs v. Jackson's judicial upset responsible for overturning abortion rights, these departures from long-standing precedent put into serious doubt perhaps the most important principle of our justice system, stare decisis, a Latin term meaning to stand by things decided. Stare decisis is a foundational guiding principle of our justice system that states that courts should honor precedents set by rulings and opinions in prior cases. While not a universal constraint, this deference to previous decisions as a matter of practice lays the groundwork for the public's trust in the court as a predictable, impartial, and continuous system able to outlive any single administration. The Supreme Court's willingness to bend or break precedent to further a partisan agenda is doing irreparable harm to public confidence in the legitimacy of the court and of the American justice system as a whole. I managed to finish the front wall of the barn with some daylight left to spare, giving me time to bust out most of the rest of the roof. With the remaining time I had left in the day, I decided to get started on the steeple that would sit on top of the barn holding the chicken. Ending out the day here, I want to say that these institutional changes I've been talking about aren't representative of the usual pendulum swing of partisan politics. In the next section, I'll explain how they fit into a decades-long project by the rich and powerful to undermine the principles of democracy and equality that so many have fought and died for. This is the capitalist ruling class's last-ditch effort to claw back power away from the people. On the final day of the build here, I still had a lot left to do. Luckily, it wasn't as boring as the first couple of days' repetitive tasks building this big structure. Lots of little details to make. I needed to finish up the steeple, create the chicken, the walls, the door, the windows, finish up the trim, and then bring everything together into one cohesive sculpture. In this video, I've really only highlighted a few areas of change that have taken place, but the same alarming institutional damage can be seen everywhere you look. Education, environmental protection, diplomacy, financial regulation, it's all coordinated. And the big kicker here is they told us about it ahead of time. The chicken I'm making here represents everything we should have seen coming. All the time that we neglected to act. The fatal consequences of our lack of urgency. All the way back during Reagan's presidency in 1981, the Heritage Foundation began laying out plans to remake the nation as a Christian nationalist oligarchy. Project 2025 is the culmination of this work that's already been frightfully successful. We can use the Project 2025 tracker to see in detail what they've already accomplished. Reducing Medicare coverage, rolling back student loan forgiveness, undermining Congress's power of the purse. You can also see the large-scale concentration camps and deployment of the military that we've seen under ICE as part of this predetermined plan. Out of 320 identifiable objectives found in the document, the Trump administration has already accomplished 129, with 68 more currently in progress. With sweeping changes across nearly every major government agency, this wasn't just an effective lobbying effort, this was an inside job. Despite claims to the contrary,
I have nothing to do with Project 2025.
The Trump administration has been working hand in hand with the Heritage Foundation since the beginning to craft their agenda. Out of the 40 listed authors of Project 2025, 18 were found to be former officials from Trump's first term, with a dozen more having served on his campaigns for office. Since the start of his second term, he's given numerous roles to contributors of the document. Russell Vought, one of Project 2025's key architects, has spearheaded its goals while serving as director of Office of Management and Budget since February of last year. Brendan Carr, who wrote Project 2025's chapter on the FCC, is now leading said agency. Authors of the document can be found across a diverse range of agencies in administrative and advisory roles, ensuring the Heritage Foundation's sweeping agenda is enacted on all fronts. An agenda of a poor and sick underclass, unchecked executive power, and white supremacist Christian nationalism. After tying all the pieces together, it was almost complete. It just needed a couple more bits of trim. And for a final finishing touch, I cut up some of the plastic sheeting I was using as a work surface to stand in for broken glass in the windows. Us leftists have been sounding the alarm against fascism since Trump's first term. What they've already accomplished, the undermining of U.S. institutions, the deployment of fascistic violence against civilians. I'm at a loss at how we recover from this. But I think it's important to document what we've lost, because the time will come again to rebuild. And once the ashes have settled, it's up to us to learn from our mistakes and ensure they won't be made again. Too many people have gotten too comfortable. We have to remember that a democratic society is an anomaly across human history. It's something that has to be continuously and vigilantly maintained, because it can be lost. I hope we haven't lost it already.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, share it with a friend. It really helps out a growing channel. And if you appreciate my art and would like to help in other ways, my supporters on Patreon get early access to videos like this, behind the scenes content, and more.
But the video's not over, because we all know balloons don't last forever. After a couple of days on display, it was time to take it all down. After hearing all the commotion, a couple of these dudes in shorts wandered in to give a helping hand. I want to give a thank you to Eighth Wonder Brewery for allowing me to use their venue, and an extra special thank you to Calisan for supporting me with the balloons.
Until next time, keep fighting and stay safe.